Welcome, everyone. Uh, it's nice to see some familiar faces and some new people joining. So welcome. For those who haven't uh, been part of the Sunday calls in the past, I usually start off with saying a few things, maybe leading a little guided inquiry, which I think I'll do this morning, and then we'll just kind of open it up for discussion. It's always very helpful for me to hear what's happening for you with respect to what I'm inviting as far as exploration of our experience. So I may just go till around 11 today because I have some other commitments, so we'll see how it goes. All right. So I was reflecting this morning on this sense we have of individuality, what we would call the self, the I, the sense of me, and how it is that we come to identify as a self in the ways that we identify as a self. And that, I think, what occurs typically is that we end up with these identities that are based on particular things that we're noticing in the field of our experience, basically. And so we're, in a sense, kind of privileging certain aspects of the field of experiencing and then identifying with those and imagining that that's what we are. So I wanted to read a passage from my last book that tries to kind of cut through that way of self-identifying. And it uses the metaphor of the body as a way of sort of opening up this idea that I want to share with you. And this is called Identity and the Body of Experience.
What page, John? I can read it long.
It's 136. Yeah. The list of things we can identify with in any given moment is a long one. Body, mind, religion, spirituality, politics, sports teams, personality, our successes, our failures, our triumphs, our tribulations, our social status, our careers, our relationships. Let's look for a moment at one of these, the body, for it can serve as an instructive metaphor illustrating just how arbitrary and deeply conditioned the process of identification is. And by the way, what I'm reading here really is its own meditation. So, sorry, there's all sorts of things going off in my electronics. What's going on here? I'm just gonna. All right. Apologize for that. Must be like what it's like for my dad in the hospital with all these machines going off and dinging. Okay. We've come to delineate certain portions of the body, fingers, toes, organs, joints, tissues, cells, as separate objects. However, the body is actually one indivisible thing, isn't it? There's just a single body. The body doesn't have separate parts. It's an entire whole. For example, take the part of the body that we designate as the wrist. Where does that portion end and the rest of what we conventionally label the arm begin? And where does the arm end and what we refer to as the shoulder begin? We, of course, understand that these designated parts are connected to the entirety of the body. However, our tendency is to conceive of them as having their own individual integrity and autonomous existence, as if they were somehow separable from the whole. Now, just as we do with the body, the physical body, and its seemingly separate parts, we divide the field of experience, what we might call the body of experience, into seemingly separate things. So just as I continue to read, just to feel the body of your experience right now, which is the full field of experience, all the different dimensions of it, right? Which is all you're ever feeling anyway. This is all that's ever occurring, is a kind of engagement with the field of experience. Okay. We call the separate parts of experience by many names: thoughts, memories, perceptions, feelings, sensations, and so on. However, these designated parts are not actually divisible from the entire body of experiencing itself. Conventionally, we of course make such distinctions, identifying the different portions of the body of experience as separate experiential phenomena. And yet we can't actually tell where the seemingly separate parts of experiencing end and the whole of the experiential field begins. So for example, you could think a thought right now, like, I don't know what you're going to have for lunch or dinner. You know, just have that thought. That thought is there as you could say, a seemingly separate piece. And we explored this last week when we were talking about boundaries, but it's very much the same thing. Can you actually find a way in which what you're calling thought is in fact separate from the entire field of experience? It's very paradoxical. You can identify and distinguish these seeming different pieces, much as you can identify the different waves in the sea. There's that wave and there's that wave. There's thought, there's feeling, there's sensation. But you can't actually pull them out of the whole field. They're inseparable from the field. And this is extraordinary to start to appreciate the seamless nature of the body of experience. We make these distinctions, identifying the different portions of the body of experience as separate phenomena, and yet we can't actually tell where the seemingly separate parts of experiencing end and the whole of the experiential field begins. Like the ocean and its ever-changing waves, the parts and the whole are ultimately inseparable. Now let's return to the question of identity. The sense of who and what we are, when we say, I'm going to the store, or I'm on a Zoom call, the sense of who and what we are is in many respects a function of what parts of the body of experiencing we're focusing on, and in turn deeming as more or less significant. For example, there may be a focus on certain thoughts, emotional states, or personality characteristics, and a corresponding sense of identification with those. In other words, we imagine that's what we are. At other times, the focus may shift towards some other aspect or dimension of the body of experiencing, such as our physical existence, our gender, our race, our political affiliation, or maybe our favorite sports team. And when this attentional shift in emphasis occurs, a different sense of identity or self-sense becomes more predominant. All of which raises a very provocative question. Exactly what part or parts of the full body of experiencing are we? Are we these physical bodies? Are we the myriad thoughts streaming, coursing through what we call the mind? Or maybe we're the ever-changing cascade of energetic qualities and emotions being experienced. And what about all that we're seeing, hearing, touching, and tasting? Are we not also those parts of the body of experiencing? Why reduce or limit ourselves to just one part or parts? Wouldn't that be tantamount to looking at a finger or a toe, a kidney or the brain, and imagining those somehow represent the whole of the body? Isn't it somewhat arbitrary to claim we are only certain portions of the body of experiencing and not others? Feel that little flicker of energy in your stomach? Isn't that also what you are? See the clouds floating in the spacious blue of space? Maybe that's you too. Hear the sounds of crickets at night? Feel that rush of love, the discomfort of uncertainty, the warmth of social connection? Maybe it's all you. So just as we sit here for just a few moments together, just feeling eyes open or closed, it doesn't matter. Just experiencing whatever you're experiencing, watching, of course, the way attention floats around the field of experience, doesn't it? There's this memory, there's this fantasy, there's this body sensation, there's this visual image. There's just little sparkle of indefinable energy and tingling. There's sounds. What if what you are is everything that's being experienced, the whole? It's not you in a world that's being experienced. It's you are the entire world of experiencing. In other words, there's just wholeness. There's not a subject experiencing objects. We could say it's all subjects, it's all subjective, or it's all objective. It doesn't really matter. But those two poles, just feel the way in which those poles can't really find them. It's not so much a self in relationship to all of this other stuff we call not self. There's just you, or just the world. Same thing. One thing. One ocean of experience with many, many different aspects to it, for sure. Thoughts are distinct, aren't they, from feelings and sensations, and a memory has a different sense than a fantasy of the future, and sound has a different quality than sight, than vision. So there's all this distinction, all this differentiation in the field, but it's one field. And what we are is just experience. All of this experience, all of it. And from this perspective, things aren't happening to us. What we are is simply the happening. All of the happening, all of the event, all of the apparition that we call life, all this, the magic show, the inexplicable, miraculous stuff of life. We are yet another of the appearances of life, but there's just this singular life. And whatever we imagine ourselves to be can't be found to be separate from anything. You can't find any separation. And this perspective of one thing, one field, has no edge to it. It's an edgeless field. It's not, it may seem like sort of a bubble of your experience, right? But the bubble has no clear edge to it, so it's boundless, infinite. This cuts through, this particular perspective cuts through all these conventional notions that we have. One that's coming to mind right now is the idea of cause and effect. One thing, a cause, having an effect on some other thing, right? That's a perspective, it's a valid perspective, and we operate generally from that vantage, that we live in a world of cause and effect. This happens and then something else happens as a result of the happening of this, but that suggests there's two things, doesn't it? But from the perspective I'm talking about, there aren't two things. There's one thing. The cause is the effect. They're one thing. One ocean moving. So this also cuts through very, very, consensus sort of reality idea that we're, we're subject to the events that are occurring. The subject, the one who the events are occurring to and having an effect on, like they're causing something to happen to us. That's all based on the notion that there are two things. But see if you can find two things. Or do you just find experiencing? And I think the recognition of this can be as simple as simply feeling what's here. Feel what's here. That's what's actual, is the felt sense of what's here. And there's not two things. There's just the feeling of what's here. Lots of different ways that can be described, of course, but you touch some object, like wherever you're sitting, if you touch, conventionally thinking I'm sitting on a chair, so I am going to touch the chair. The subject, I, is going to touch the object, chair, right? But as experience, all there is feeling of the experience that I call touching a chair, me touching a chair. But as a feeling, it's absolutely singular, isn't it? There's not a subject and an object, there's just experience. It's a very, very different, the feeling of that is very, very different. It's, there's not one thing pushing against another, not one thing arguing with another, not one thing in opposition to another. What if there was nothing in opposition to anything else, actually? That's what reality is like. There's not one thing opposed to another thing. There's one thing. And that has a very different set of felt sense. The sense of that feels different. And the implications of that are I mean, sometimes the ordinary way of defining things as events happening to me is going okay. And when the events are relatively pain-free and to our liking and all is well. But what about when the shit's hitting the fan and things are difficult? I was talking before we formally started about my dad and the challenges he's facing with his health right now. And he very much, has a sense, understandably, of that, of how overwhelming that conventional understanding of events happening to us can be, what the experience of that can feel like. It can feel like hell. It can feel like, and it does not infrequently for humans, feel like we're at the mercy of the events of our lives, the circumstances, the experiences. And then we try to do something about that. Again, understandable. We try to rectify the circumstances and the experiences so that we have more of a sense of well-being. Perfectly fine thing to do. I do it all the time. So in the case of my father, to use that example, he can try to, and through the support of people in his life, including his medical practitioners who are trying to help rectify this event that he's trying to contend with, to heal it, to fix it, to repair it, and so on, so that his quality of life can return. Because from within the ordinary sort of defined framework of cause and effect and separate objects and subjects and self and other and all of that, the quality of life is very low for him, to the point of where he's not sure it makes sense, to be alive. It's that low, right? Very understandable. But that's not the only perspective. There's this other perspective that transcends those definitions of separate pieces and things and cause and effect. And it doesn't negate that perspective. It just illuminates another perspective that we can avail ourselves of, that we can feel, recognize, and discover you could say another world, but it's this world. It's not another world, it's this world. It's not two worlds. The defined world of seemingly separate pieces and parts is the same as the ultimately indefinable, transcendental, singular world beyond all the definitions that make it appear as if there are separate pieces and parts. So those two worlds, they coexist in every instant, and they are ultimately a single reality. The described world and the ultimately unresolvable, indescribable, indeterminate, transcendental world, of which the seemingly describable world is made of. That's what's really trippy, is that all of the descriptions are attempts to characterize and reify and make substantive something that is ultimately not reifiable. It's beyond any possibility of classifying or characterizing or defining or describing. And therein lies the great freedom. It's the freedom from all descriptions, all designations, all characterizations, all the apparent limitations that spring forth from those descriptions and definitions. I like to say, I'll kind of end by saying this, that, we can solve the apparent problems of the world at two levels. One is to address them at the level of the description, like with my father's case, addresses cancer surgically, addresses pain with pain medication, and so on and so forth, right? So that's addressing the problem at the level of the description. Very reasonable. And we can also address problems by realizing that they don't exist, that they are, in a sense, defined into existence. So those may seem very contradictory somehow, but they both, again, they coexist. For one, if I hit my head really hard on the table that I'm sitting next to, I'll feel what we describe as pain. And then I might need to do something about that, put ice on the bump that I just made by hitting my head on the table. So that's all the described world. And yet each one of those things, the table, the head that hit the table, the ice that I put on the head, every single one of those parts of that story that I'm describing, that description that I'm relaying, is ultimately unresolvable and indescribable, infinite, fathomless. It's just like, I think we can understand the simultaneity of these perspectives by looking at one of these things at a physical level. Like I talk about this sometimes. There's the table, and yeah, the simultaneity is from one perspective. The thing's hard. It's got substance, right? And then from the perspective of what it is more fundamentally in terms of its quantum subatomic nature, it's anything but a table, right? It's a dance of inconceivable, God knows what, I mean, isn't that just extraordinary? Like it's not two things, it's not two worlds, it's one single reality that can be seen and experienced and understood from multiple perspectives. And so I'm just introducing this, you could call it kind of a transcendental perspective, which is the recognition that reality doesn't, in fact, collapse in the ways we imagine it's collapsible into our definitions and descriptions. And that is liberating to feel the reality of that. Well, I'd love to hear from any of you who would care to share anything related to what I'm pointing to here, and our inquiry here around this other perspective, you could say.
Well, that was pretty amazing, John, what you just shared. Awesome. So I had an experience a few days ago. I was taking a walk and I thought, I'm feeling blue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm walking, I'm like, I'm feeling blue. And then I just read in your book about something about exploring, like, what is, like, I'm feeling tired, what does that mean? So
Mm-hmm.
then I explored, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling blue. So there are thoughts that are coming in that are sad thoughts. And then I'm like, well, what is that? These thoughts, they're like cobwebs. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
unsubstantial. And then I'm like, well, there's like this heaviness,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, where's this heaviness? What is this heaviness? There's like, again, there was no substance to this. There's nothing substantial about this heaviness. And then I'm like, well, this word blue, where did that even come from? And what does it describe? And so as I explored deeper and deeper into this, I'm feeling blue, I couldn't find anything. And based on what you just shared, which I'm so appreciative of, I was still freaking blue. I mean, it included that. I'm like, okay, there's nothing there. I get that. And included in that is, yeah, I'm still in a funk.
Mm-hmm.
So, I love that you shared that about including like the humanity aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think like spirituality meant you're just like totally, zoned out and your humanity doesn't even count but it's included.
Mm-hmm.
It, those, so
They're not two separate things.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right. Exactly. And that's beautiful. I mean, that what you described is a perfect illustration um, of the simple kind of and yet powerful, you could say, impact of looking at your experience in that way, investigating it experientially. Like, okay, so a sense of heaviness, like it's describing a flavor of experience, no question about it, that feels different than a sense of lightness, right? We have those words, and this is what's so curious, is that it's like there's a, and this may not make any sense, but I was looking at one of the last chapters in the book, because the book was originally going to be called "It's Not What You Think It Is," and the publishers changed the title. But when it was that title, I wrote almost the second to last chapter, I think, is it's exactly what you think it is, but so much more. And that points to just what you described, which is, feeling blue is feeling blue. It's exactly that. It's very specific. It's like our experience is very specifically what it is. But what's so astonishing is that you can't quite say what that is, and yet it's very specifically what it is. I mean, that sounds probably like, crazy ramblings from me, but this is the curious thing. It's like, I often use flavors of food to illustrate this too. Like every flavor of every food, is quite distinct, isn't it, from other flavors of other foods? Very specific. Like the taste of a cherry. It's got this specificity to it, like it's a particular that's like nothing else. It's a cherry. It's like it's its own little, well, it's one of the universe's flavors, the flavor of a cherry. And yet, if you were to try to tell me what that is, if you were to try to convey what makes a cherry in terms of its flavor, what could you possibly say? I mean, you immediately hit a wall of inconceivability, like immediately. And yet, it's very specific, but at the same time, entirely unfindable. So it's there, yet unfindable. What? What are you talking about? That's emptiness is form, and form is emptiness, in the Heart Sutra of Buddhism. The form is the form. I'm blue. It feels heavy. I'm in a cobweb of whatever kinds of thought. That's all the form. There it is. Undeniable, actually there as an actual experience, as a texture of experience, a texture of reality, a flavor of reality. Undeniable. Why would we ever deny it? There it is. And yet, curiously, when you investigate what it is, you come up empty-handed. It's like a rainbow, a rainbow's a great metaphor. You're not going to deny that you're seeing the colors of the rainbow. If you go inside into the rainbow to investigate where the rainbow is, you will not find a rainbow. You'll find space. It's not there. And yet it is there. That's the paradox, is here but unfindable. Absolutely graspable in the sense of its presence, and yet simultaneously beyond our grasp. And that, like, as you, I think, were feeling, when you touch that ungraspable nature of what you were experiencing, it didn't, in your case, make it go away per se. But I'm guessing it gave you like a totally different vantage on it, didn't it? In terms of the actual experience. I'm imagining, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
No, it absolutely did. That was like there are two sides now, or it just opened up the experience. It wasn't as specific. It was neutralized somehow. It was, wow. Again, words,
Well, if you take something like feeling blue, feeling down or whatever, when you go and investigate and you can't quite pin down what it is, in other words, you discover its unfindability, the whole notion of it being a problem is seriously called into question. Because if you can't find it, how is it a problem? Again, that doesn't preclude you doing something at the level of the description to make the experience different, you know? Like, that's very instinctive, you know? It's like, I mean, you put your hand on a hot stove and that's not a problem in the ultimate sense of its unfindable, whatever that sensation is. But instinctively, you just take your hand off, right? We have an instinctive movement away from that, right? So it's understandable that if some aspect of us is hurting, that we seek, you know, attention to that. That's natural, right? In the different ways. But this discovery of the unfindable, indescribable nature of all of our experience, all phenomena, opens up this whole other, you could say, kind of capacity to be with all of this dynamism and all of this, you know, I mean, looking at the process of my father of old age and death, you know, like whenever that might occur for us, we're sort of in the process of old age and dying from the moment we're born. It just gets more pronounced the longer we live, it would seem. You know, having access to this other perspective as we go through those difficult, particularly difficult life moments, old age and death being right up there at the top of the list, probably, or at least it can be that way. Wow, you open up this whole other possibility of, I would say, kind of enjoying even the finding a kind of ease and joy, in a sense, in the comfort, if you will, in the even the incredibly uncomfortable. Like it's there in the unfindable nature of it. It's the only way I would describe it. It's right there, like right there in the discomfort is like a transcendental comfort, in a sense. You feel totally out of place, totally confused, totally not out of sorts. Right there in that experience is home. That's home. Not a home that we necessarily associate with feeling a sense of being at home, which we tends to be more warm and fuzzy and everything's kind of going, there's a flow and blah, blah, blah. But more, no, it's the home that is every experience, that is every moment, that is the groundless ground and basis of every state, of all of this. Thanks for sharing that experience. That was awesome.
Well, and then yesterday I was feeling happy.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, this is happiness. You know, there's a sense of exhilaration.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, how is that different than the blue? You know, I'm like, it's still just like clouds or just wisps.
Mm-hmm.
And different thoughts were, and I just energized. I'm like, oh, what is, you know, the flavor was different, but investigating, it was like you said, home is home is home.
Yeah.
And so that was cool too. I
Yeah,
mean,
in some traditions they refer to that as the one taste of everything. So there's obviously the different tastes of happiness and blueness, right? Very different tastes. So when they're talking about the one taste of everything, what the hell are they talking about? They're talking about that whether it's happy or sad or clear or confused or melancholy or joyful, the one taste is the taste of indescribability. You could say the taste of inconceivability, the taste of the unresolvable. And that's the taste of the whole, the taste of the common denominator underlying all of this, you could say, the basis of everything.
It's like this unlearning of everything I was raised to believe. I mean, you started off with talking about the sense of self.
Hmm.
You know, I was raised to believe that certain feelings, you know, are wrong, or certain, feelings are good, these are bad. And, throughout my entire childhood, I was, this is separate from that. And this is what you do, cause and effect. I mean, there's just blasted with separation. So this coming back home to wholeness is, startling.
Hmm.
And it's the key for me is the investigation, into things that I used to believe in, and I'm seeing through
Hmm.
all the beliefs now. There's nothing there.
Hmm. And I think that the, hopefully, the value of coming together in these kinds of ways is, we're not getting much reinforcement for the perspective that I'm sharing here in most of our daily walk of life. I mean, it's most people just take for granted that the that the whole is split up into all these infinite number of pieces that are sometimes in cooperation with one another and harmony, but many times not. And so that's just taken for granted to be that's the way it is. And so it can be helpful to come together like this and be reminded that, oh no, there's another thing going on here that we most of us, haven't, at least probably spent many years never hearing about. Yeah. I'm putting together a little well, I finished putting it together, a little free ebook that's just a kind of a compilation of a lot of these little memes that I've been sharing on social media. I just want to kind of put them together in one place, and they're all basically designed to try to evoke very much, what we're discussing here. And the current title of this compilation is, um, "Everything is the Doorway," and that's exactly it. This is the doorway right now. This experience you're having, it's nothing other than this experience. There isn't any other experience anyway. This perception, not a different one, the one you're having right now. This is the absolute reality. It's the kind of holographic nature of it. Everything is a doorway into the same single reality. In other words, we don't have to like, I can talk about these things. They can sound very whatever, highfalutin, philosophically, whatever, esoteric, like the transcendent. But it's right. It's just your ordinary experience, so-called ordinary experience, sitting here, just like this. There's a meditation in the book, my last book, called "Sitting in a Chair Isn't Merely Sitting in a Chair," and it plays with that idea of like, oh yeah, well, what could be more ordinary than here we are sitting, many of us, in chairs right now, and we could describe it that way, but it's an incredible oversimplification of the astonishing, miraculous, unfathomable nature of what's going on here that we might dumb down and characterize as, oh, just sitting on a chair. So it's both incredibly ordinary and everyday. So what? Sitting on a chair. But it's universes upon universes that make up, that are the building blocks experientially, you could say, of this thing that we collapse into a very simple description of sitting on a chair. It's this dance of energies and sensation um, and mixed together with all of that, the consciousness that's illuminating all of those things. I mean, it's just unbelievable, I mean, just unfathomable set of phenomena, we could say, that constitute sitting on a chair. And each single piece of that, each sensation, each thought, each flux of energy, all of it, is subtle, beyond subtle, beyond subtle, beyond subtle, as to what it actually is. It's like you just feel what's here as the most sort of gross level experience, a physical sensation, right? And what it actually is subtle, beyond subtle, beyond subtle.
It was occurring to me as Pam was speaking that there can be an exploration. You've been talking as experiences are negative because we want to somehow dismiss and see those as unreal. But when the experiences or sensations are more positive or neutral, even sitting in a chair, that there's not that same impetus I have found.
Not the same impetus to investigate them, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we want to accept the positive as real.
Right. Yeah.
And the neutral as just neutral, but the negative we want to somehow quash.
Right. We want to figure out the negative because it's bothering us. We want to.
Correct.
We want to try to resolve it. For sure.
Right.
Yeah. No question about it. But of course, with what happens with the so-called positive ones, the neutral ones, like you say, we don't much pay a lot of attention to them. So we end up kind of, you could say, sort of ignoring them to some degree. But with the so-called positive ones, the sort of the double-edged sword of those, of course, is that because we've reified them through our definitions and descriptions as being actual things, concrete things that can satisfy and fulfill, we chase after them. Nothing wrong with that, but we can be kind of caught in this sort of hamster wheel of like continually imagining that they're going to fill us up. And then when we get them, we feel some relief because, oh, we got what we were looking for. We got that positive experience or circumstance to happen. But of course, we can't ever get it to hold in place. We can't get stuff to hold still because that's not the nature of life. So if we look at our states of mind, they're constantly fluctuating, aren't they? I mean, we're not just flatlining in bliss, so to speak, or any other state for that matter. But so at the level of the description, we can try to, if you will, sort of manifest or bring forth as many of the circumstances and experiences we put in the box of positive as possible, right? I mean, we do that. We try to have positive relationships and positive states of mind and positive bodily states, right? In the sense of, we could say positive being the ones we wish to have more of as organisms, and then try to have fewer of the ones that we put in the negative box. And that whole sort of approach to well-being is, we all know very well, don't we? And there's nothing wrong with it, except that it's not very reliable. That's for sure, because we're constantly being confronted with things that don't go our way, constantly being confronted with experiences that don't fit into our box that we equate with well-being and positivity. And then what do we do? Oh, well, now what? Well, what I'm talking about is a kind of a reliable, ever-present realm, if you will, of well-being that doesn't ever go anywhere. It's always here, and it doesn't. And what's so powerful about it is it does not depend upon the particularities of what's being experienced. So that's why it is equally present in pain as it is in pleasure. Granted, it may sometimes be easier to see that when you're not totally underwater, when you're not completely, um, feeling like you're drowning in a sense in the particularity if it's a difficult one. And so it can be harder. It can be harder to recognize that that's not merely what you think it is when it's particularly intense, no question about it. Sometimes people will say, you know, the high watermark of recognizing what I'm talking about is when it can be recognized when the shit's hitting the fan. When you can see that everything is a doorway, as I was describing the title of this book that I'm putting together, actually means everything. It doesn't mean certain things. It means everything is a doorway. But sometimes it's hard. It can be difficult to recognize that. I will definitely.
Well, and I would argue that the negative things are seemingly whatever we're using the word negative to be are better doorways often than the positive experiences, because we don't feel the need to investigate or understand. We just want to hoard those experiences.
Right. Yeah, I think it's Karen, I think it's very individual. I think some people will find that the more, you know, so-called afflictive states are potent doorways sometimes into this, whereas other people will find that that's not the case. I think it's very idiosyncratic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You know, the thing about the positive, why those can sometimes be more difficult to recognize this, again, as you were saying, is because we have an investment in them being positive. You know what I mean? So it's like, hey, don't take this away from me. I like this, you know? And I'm like saying, well, it's not what you imagine it is. And you're like, the hell it isn't. I like this. Don't tell me it's not what I think it is. So there can be an equal investment, in a sense, in the things that we like as much as the things that we don't like.
Yeah.
Investment in the descriptions and the definitions is what I mean. Yeah.
Right. Well, as you were saying that, I was reminded of people who are bipolar and they don't want to deal with the depressive part, but they like the mania part.
Right. Yeah.
And that is a very difficult thing for people, because they just who are dealing with that, because they don't want to not have that.
Right.
And you know, I knew someone very well who just kept saying, I want to be happy. I want to be happy for years. And I was like, you know, you just get to be happy. That's not the way it works. I mean, you get to this phase you were talking about. Sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. But it's not like flatlining bliss, as you said. It's not.
Right. And so that's the whole world of the coming and going of experience. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes not so pleasant. And we all know that very well. And that's an aspect of the way reality shows up, as all this distinction and differentiation and qualitative differences. And then there's this possibility of exploring what you could say is the underlying basis of all the descriptions. And that's really what I'm pointing to, is it opens up another vista for us, another possibility of a way of encountering reality that is quite different than encountering it solely in terms of the way we're describing it. It doesn't preclude encountering it, just as Pam was talking about. We can continue to experience it in its defined sort of dimension, even as we recognize that it's beyond that simultaneously. It just gives us another vantage, which is a powerful one.
Silence is lovely. I
It
was just
is, isn't
noticing
it?
as I've been tracking you today
Yeah.
that there's a lot of resonance and a lot of dropping in deeper. And then there's also mostly from the gut. It's like this paired thing, mostly from the gut, and something from the head of like this sort of anxiety conditioning of wanting to do something or having to do something like to escape the moment, or do I have to do something to justify my existence? All this stuff that just sitting with it, so to say, at least from my language, interferes with that ability to connect or just be here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just and interesting just to sit with that and just sort of feel it sensationing.
Yeah, and I think to the degree that there's an opportunity to, from this other vantage, to not see any aspect of experience as representing any sort of obstacle, to anything. My apologies. I'm just going to mute for a second while this. Sorry about that. Yeah, what's it like when, how are you describing so these thoughts come up about whatever, like something more that needs to happen, or I forget how you were describing it, but like it's just more experience, right? It's just more of the flow of reality, actually.
Yeah, there is, like you hinted at, that part that wants to label that as bad or something that needs to be rooted out so that things can.
Right. So I can get back to the correct place that I'm supposed to be. It's like I'm really suggesting that there's no correct experience, there's just whatever is here. There's no, again, from the vantage of there being a singularity, a single field of experience, or a single ocean of existence. It's like there's no privileged status of any experience or state of mind, because they're all emanations of the same reality. And so that really changes the game, doesn't it? Because it's like you can't, everywhere it's like we're cruising around the field of experience, and everywhere you go, you find the same thing. Basically, you find reality. You're not going to find something other than reality. You're not going to find anything else but reality. It's like, and whenever you think, oh shit, I lost reality, I found something other than reality, just remember what I just said. It's like, no, you just found another version of it. Oh, this is another flavor, another taste, another. And then it's like, then you're home free always, which you are. home free always. Right? Yeah.
It reminds me of the Shin Shin Main that says, the way is easy, it has no preferences.
Yeah, exactly. And the sort of extension, my kind of asterisk on that one is like, and having preferences is also fine too. In other words, be careful not to turn it into having preferences is wrong, because then now you have a preference for not having preferences. You see, that's how radical it actually is. It's like, it's okay to have preferences; those are included too. But yes, the point is of that particular passage is that the kind of privileging of one thing over another, of like, that's better, that's higher, that's more enlightened, that's whatever. It's like, that wave's better than that wave. No, they're all the frickin' ocean. So, and then we can still have our preferences. I mean, I have preferences. I imagine you all do. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that our ultimate well-being, if you want to put it that way, doesn't lie in the satisfaction of those preferences, because it's already accomplished. Our ultimate well-being is just the nature of reality. And so it doesn't depend upon the preferences being satisfied or not. And but yeah, we can still pursue preferences because if we're inclined to, why not? Nothing lost in the process, actually. Richard, your chuckling makes me think about I was trying to find this. Let me see if I can dig it up, because I was talking with a friend who's interested in this stuff, and we were kind of inquiring together, and and we suddenly found ourselves laughing, you know, and which is not that unusual to do when you start exploring this stuff. But I was reminded of a something I think I was attributed to Ramana Maharshi. So then I was trying to locate it, and I let's see if I can pull it up here, because it's a yeah, here it is. This is from Ramana Maharshi. There is no greater mystery than this, that we keep seeking reality, though in fact we are reality. Isn't that funny? We think that there's something hiding reality and that this must be destroyed before reality is gained. How ridiculous. A day will dawn when you will laugh at all your past efforts. That which will be the day you laugh is also here and now. The apparent obstacles are to you know, there we are, we're swimming in the ocean. It's like, where's the ocean? You know, well, that wave's an obstacle. That wave's an obstacle to realizing the ocean. No, the waves are the ocean, so there are no obstacles. I'm going to have to sign off here, folks. Apologize for the earlier departure, but it's a pleasure being with all of you. Thank you, as always, for joining me, and wish you a wonderful rest of your Sundays. And I'll see some of you again, hopefully. All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks,
You.
folks.
Thanks, John.
Take good care.
Thanks, John. See you tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth.